We are now recording and will be live in about 5 seconds. We are now live.
Thanks, Michelle. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Education Finance Committee to order. I'm sorry I'm joining you remote today, but got stuck in a snowstorm yesterday. I can see everyone but Mr. Sini. So John, if you need to speak, can you just speak?
He's gonna move around. Just trying to.
Okay. As long as everyone's distanced, or someone just tell me John has his hand raised.
Okay. So well, I don't know if we'll all fit in the screen, but.
Okay. Or Jeff can help me with camera angles. All right, Rich, we'll start with the review of the January 2021 financial report, please.
So this is the financial report through January. We are currently projecting a year-end deficit of $1,020,293. Last night, the RTM did approve a special appropriation of $1,788,130. So that'll be reflected in the February financial report. The two primary differences between the forecast, this forecast and the December forecast of just shy of 2.1 million, includes the state allocation of the ESSER 2 grant, which was about 596,000. Which was part of the federal stimulus package. And then we've also updated the excess cost forecast, which is a swing of about 268,000, and we'll get to that in RC 24. One other primary difference, which we'll also get to in RC 24, is out of district special education transportation, which is a swing of about $153,000. Those three items alone really create that difference between the 2.1 and then the $1 million here. So similar to the previous months, general education RCs are forecasting a positive balance of 152,979. Special education RCs are forecasting a positive 600,105, with the bulk of that those savings really being that out of district transportation and excess cost. And then reopening expenditures, a deficit of 1,773,377. But again, as I mentioned last night, the RTM did approve a special appropriation just shy of 1.8 million. Going to RC1, the main highlighted change is we do have a forecasted favorable balance of clubs and councils for $2,200. The outdoor club is not going to run this year, and that really is a COVID savings. Everything else really remains the same. RC3 continues to be savings from student interns. Moving to RC8, the teacher aides still show a favorable balance of 3,000. Student interns still a favorable balance. We do have safety patrol, which remains unfilled, resulting in a savings of $1,100. In the February report, we will flag that they have actually decided not to run any of their clubs, and so that whole $6,000 will end up being savings going forward. Royal, similar to previous months, a small amount of savings in grade 3 teachers and student interns. Facilities remains the same. We have a positive surplus of about $70,000 in use of fields, offset by a negative balance of building rentals, as we're not renting out our buildings, of about $69,000. So the two really net together as a wash. Similar to the previous month, RC13, a favorable balance in unfilled clubs and councils, including All Town, Elementary, and Band. RC15, a small amount of salary savings in the copy center. RC16, the one primary change is a favorable balance in legal fees. We have looked at the first 6 months of legal fees, and they are trending slightly lower. So we have disencumbered a little bit of money there. Everything else remains the same as the previous month. Similar to the previous month, RC18 personnel contract support is a positive $48,000, and that's due to favorable collective bargaining contracts with the secretaries, nurses, and paraprofessionals. RC19 is new. We do have a vacant program coordinator. We are flagging about $10,000 in salary savings. This assumes the position will remain vacant for 5 weeks. Obviously, if it's longer, those savings would grow. RC20, savings in the audit account of about $1,300. The annual audit just came in under budget. It was just done quicker than anticipated. RC23, continuing ed in summer school, favorable balance in adult education contracted services of about $4,500. And this is just less participation in the program run through the Stanford Public Schools. RC24, similar salary savings in special education teachers. We do have 2 transfers, which we'll talk about later, but a favorable balance in speech therapist of $92,744. We do have a speech therapist out on an unpaid leave of absence, which we did flag in the past. But it is being backfilled by a contracted speech therapist, so this is just really a reclassification of line items. A psychologist is also showing a favorable balance as we have a psychologist out on leave, and that is also being filled by a consultant service. And so this is really, again, just a reallocation between two line items, and that is the other transfer. Teacher aid remains a favorable balance of about 37. Consultant services is forecasting that deficit, which would be offset by that transfer if approved. Same with contracted speech, forecasting a deficit of the 92,000. But again, if that transfer is approved by the salary savings in the speech therapy line, that wouldn't be offset. We did mention earlier, we are flagging a favorable balance of 152,813. This is for out-of-district transportation. This is a result of, we have confirmed that we are not paying any expenses for days that the out-of-district location is fully remote, and so we're not paying those transportation costs. And so that is a favorable balance of 152,000.
You said that's new, Rich? I'm sorry.
So it's just confirmed. We
Confirmed.
we weren't paying anything in the past, but it wasn't confirmed. So we just know now that we're not going to pay if that continues, plus what occurred in the past. Tuition, public schools and private schools combined end up being about positive $200,000. Both are forecasted to be positive. The one change we did make was an update to excess costs. We did include the estimated revenues in the packet from the state of Connecticut. Based on the December 1st filing, the state is actually showing a reimbursement rate of 83.54%. This would be the highest reimbursement rate in a decade. They do anticipate this to decline as districts submit their March 1st filing. So the state has a budget of about $140 million that they allocate to districts throughout Connecticut. The less expenditures that are submitted by all districts means the higher the reimbursement rate. The more districts that submit more expenditures, the lower the reimbursement rate. So the anticipation earlier in the year was that because schools were closed March through June of last year, that they'd have a lot of makeup expenditures this year, which would drive that reimbursement rate down to that 67% we talked about. But because most schools were not open for the year, they were hybrid remote, they haven't really had that opportunity to have those makeup expenditures. So as schools become more open or going from remote to hybrid, the state is anticipating that the March 1st filing will change slightly, which would drive down that reimbursement rate. So we are forecasting 75%, which was really originally what we were budgeting. That would be a positive swing of about $100,000 or $200,000 from the forecast. The reason we're doing 75% is, even talking to the state, we do expect it to be down. However, that number is based on our December 1st filing. And one of the things we'll take into account in the March 1st filing is those savings in out-of-district transportation. So we'll likely, unlike other districts, submit a little bit lower than we submit in December 1st. So it will probably balance out, which is one of the reasons we're not doing that 83%. Moving to RC 25 fixed. We did update this slightly. So we did have 2 snow day remote days in February. So we did save on transportation there. However, we did have to make up that day at Tokenique because of the power outage. So we do have an expense there. They're essentially a wash between the two, but we did want to flag that. Electricity is showing a favorable balance of about $42,000. We have had some decline in usage, and that really is related to the fact that schools have been closed on some occasions or hybrid and just less usage. So we have actually went through all our bills, looked at our usage rates, our kilowatt rates, our fees attached to electricity to get a good idea of where that forecast. We do believe that 42,000 will be pretty accurate. Sewer remains positive about 12,000. Property insurance is still that positive about 1,100. Health insurance, we are forecasting a slight negative variance of about 65,000. We have seen a slight uptick in dental claims in the past few months. We saw a large drop in dental claims towards the end of last year, and that's because most people couldn't go to the dentist. Things are opening up. People can start to go to the dentist. We're seeing a little bit of an uptick in dental claims. And then we've had a few census changes between employees. Unemployment is still forecasted at a deficit of about $18,000. Moving to RC 26, paraprofessionals are slightly under about $15,000. ELP tuition is still a negative variance of just shy of $90,000. We currently have 35 students. However, we did have a student enrolled just last week to make that 36. So in the February report, we'll update that. But again, given it's end of February, it's a prorated tuition, so we're not going to get that full amount.
Any questions?
Can you see me, Ted?
I can't. I saw you in booth. So Mr. Sini.
Thank you. So if I net out the 1.788130 that we was just approved by the RTM, the special appropriation. The right to assume that we're running a surplus now of over 767,000.
So we are, a big part of that is that 268,000 assumption for excess costs, and then that $150,000 for out-of-district transportation. Those two really make up that bulk of that difference. Again, that out-of-district transportation is really a COVID-related savings. So whether or not we end up choosing to transfer that into the COVID account and let that sit there, or will we let that sit there in RC24? But at this point, we are forecasting a slight positive balance. If we look back at the previous reports, we did have that favorable balance in special education, not quite as high because we were looking at a lower reimbursement rate for excess costs, but we did have a slight positive variance then too.
So
And-
Mr. Riddle, I'm sorry, go ahead, finish, please.
And so I guess the question is, we'll have a better view after the March 1st filing. So we'll be talking about this next month and get a kind of net out those two major items.
So we'll have a better idea. It won't quite be the next report. So everybody submits on March 1st, but the state doesn't turn it around, let's say on March 2nd.
Okay.
So it'll probably be another month or so after that, by the time we actually know what the reimbursement rate will be. We do get our first installment of excess cost on February 28th. So we'll get that 75% or roughly 75% of that revenue in. So that'll also give us a little bit of an idea of where we're going to stand. And then they'll make that adjustment based on the March 1st filing, whether it's up or down. And we get that at the end of May.
Okay, and sorry, one last one, Tara. That 75, that's your estimate, but even that 75 could be
Could
plus or minus.
could swing up or down, correct?
Okay, thank you.
So Mr. Riddle, that goes to, can you talk about the assumptions of this budget? Is this budget assuming full in-person school from March 1st on, or does it have other assumptions built into it?
So we are assuming that school is kind of going to remain as is. In RC28 in COVID, we do have a little bit of money allocated for additional custodial supplies, which we haven't spent, a little bit of money for replacement plexiglass. But we are assuming that the model that we have currently is the model that we're going to have going forward to the end of June.
Okay, and so, I mean, certainly not because, and I don't even mean to imply this, so I'm going to put the disclaimer out there, not that we make decisions about, or the superintendent makes decisions about school due to finances. Is there anything that we should know in any type of forecast that would significantly change this budget if we were to close for a week or two or not? Like, do we have those scenarios modeled out? And
But I don't think they'll be significant, but one of the things we'll see is if we're remote for a period of time, we're going to probably have more losses in the food service account, which we'll need more contributions to. But if we're remote for a period of time, we're not going to have as much cost in LPNs. We're not going to have as much cost in custodial services. We probably won't have as much cost in substitutes because we won't have to come up with the teachers to cover for those who are quarantining. So while in the aggregate, it likely won't change significantly, you'll probably see some line item shift where we might need more money in food service, but we'll need less money in contracted cleaning and areas like that.
Okay. Any other questions? Mrs. Ritchie?
Thank you, sorry. Does this work? So a basic question, all our accounts are current, so anything that's a payable is, if it was due, we've paid it, right?
So everything's net, typically net 30.
Okay,
So there could be like a couple that are in the balance of being paid versus. what
Okay.
we
just
issued
a
first.
general question. And I see that the general RCs had a really big switch, a big reduction in December. It was favorable balance of 363,000, and now we're looking at 142,000. Could you just speak to that so we can get a general overview of why there's such a big switch?
So we do wait until the board approves the transfers for the prior month. So once they approve those transfers, that money came out of the general education RCs into the
Into
COVID
COVID.
reopening.
Okay.
So that's why you'll see general education RCs high and then the following month lower, assuming that those transfers are approved.
Okay, so it's just reflecting those transfers that weren't reflected last, just to make sure that we're clear on that. And obviously there was a big jump in the special education RCs, but that's attributed to the ECR and the transportation favorable balance. So just wanted to be clear on that. With the ESSER 2 grant, we have not received that yet. Do we want to talk about that in the next item, Tara? I don't want to jump ahead.
I still have some questions on this report. So Deb, if you want to hold those for a minute, but before I jump in, Sarah, anyone else have questions?
John asked my question. Thank you.
Okay,
I have another one, Tara. You want to go first or you want to?
no, go ahead, Mr. Sini.
So if I do some back of the envelope math, this is in related to the ECR kind of variation. Is it a linear? If I'm trying to estimate it and moving from 67.5, which was our original kind of forecast of 75 to 83.4%. Is it a linear relationship dollar per dollar between those variances? Or is there some, or am I trying to dumb it down too much?
So there is a little bit more of a nuance. So we only get reimbursed if we exceed a 4.5 multiple on a student. So our 4.5 multiple is roughly $97,000. So let's call it $100,000. You have to spend the first $100,000 before you get reimbursed. So we do have a number of expenditures for students that fall below that threshold. So whether they go up or down, there's no impact on excess costs. For the students that exceed that 4.5 multiple, if the reimbursement rate's at 83.4, you're going to get more. If it's 67.5, obviously you're going to get less. Typically, what ends up happening with excess costs is there's two reasons why you could get more or less money. The first reason, which is similar to this, is the reimbursement rate. So your expenditures haven't really significantly changed, but the state's reimbursing you more. And that's really a product of less special education expenditures reaching various districts 4.5 multiple that gets submitted to the state. And so then there's that pot of money grows for everybody in the district. The other is you've simply just spent more money for your students. And so in that case, you would typically see a lot of negative variances, whether it's in out of district tuition, transportation, speech, related services. And in that case, you'll get a little bit more of a reimbursement because you've spent more. And typically what ends up happening is that variance above and beyond the budget for excess costs will help offset some of those overages that you might have in those speech or tuition accounts.
So I guess just to add on that, it's important to note that the pot of money from the state doesn't change. It's just how people are submitting to the state is what is changing.
While the expenditures for the districts typically always grow, the state has pretty much flat funded excess
that
costs.
pot has stayed the same over the years.
The participation rate, basically.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. All right, Rich, I want to run through a few accounting questions, just as I look at it, and I'm not the accountant, so your help will be appreciated. ELP, where are we recording and how are we covering that loss of tuition?
So it's considered a loss of revenue is essentially the same as an expenditure you don't have money for. And so that is netted against that special education RC. So it's RC 24 and 26. So you could either leave that loss of revenue to show that you did reflect the loss of revenue. You could elect to make a transfer to bring down that revenue account, which means you'd have to find that revenue. Some of the offsets will be the lower amount in paraprofessionals. Some of it will be in transportation, special education. But just if you have a deficit in contracted speech or consulting services, a loss in revenue is treated in the same way.
Yeah, so I'm just, as I look at it, we're zeroed out here on your RC 24, and in my budget book, I'd go under my object detail to see that revenue loss. But I just want to figure out, how are we covering that with teachers? I know you have some lower aides, but we still have the same number of classrooms and teachers.
So it's essentially a deficit. And so all those unencumbered available funds that you have throughout the budget, whether it's an RC 26, 24, really any of the RCs, are what's going to be needed to cover that loss. And so if you're running if everything is very tight, likely you'd end up having to make a transfer to offset that revenue. So you earmark those funds. But based on where we're at now, it's pretty similar to what we did with excess cost. If we remember last year, we ended up about $100,000 lower than what we budgeted for. We left that account showing that negative variance so that it was clear that we didn't actually receive what we were supposed to receive. Similar to the anticipation here is that we're going to leave that account as is so that we know we didn't actually reach that revenue. But we have to know that somewhere within the budget, you're going to have to come up with that approximately $90,000 of offsets to cover that expenditures. Otherwise, your overall budget will be in a deficit.
Yeah, so I mean, that's, you know where I'm going with it. So that's what I want to watch, and that's what I want to be careful with. And then if I look at RC 24 and I look, and we'll talk about these transfers coming up, but it looks like on contracted physical therapy, contracted speech, we're maxing out, and these transfers, should they be approved, will cover it. But do we have everything encumbered at this point through the end of the year, or are these just the bills that are currently in and we are encumbering that way?
So this is forecasted through the end of the year. Obviously, if a student moves in or an IEP or PPT determines that somebody needs services over and above what's currently happening, we may need a transfer then. These transfers really aren't a shortage of money. They're just really a reallocation of how that money is spent.
Yeah, and I understand we're taking, and it's actually Thank you. Very obvious. We're taking right from salary to go to the consulting services from the salary. I'm just curious that these are all forecasted, all known through the end of the year, not just the bills that we've currently
Right.
received from providers.
Can I just follow up on that, Tara?
Yep.
Just a general question about encumbering. Like when it comes to salaries and benefits, do we encumber for the full year because they're contractual? So in other words, if there's a position, and I'll ask this later on, we talk about the COVID expenses, we should be encumbering salaries for the full
So
year.
we do encumber salaries for the full year,
Okay,
as long as they're an annual salaried employee, so a teacher, administrator, custodian, et cetera. We do encumber for the whole year. If an employee leaves, we disencumber that salary and
Right.
then it falls to fund balance. If you're a part-time employee, which is really like the lunch monitors as an example, those are
Right.
not employees we can encumber because there is a bit of variable
right,
in terms of the amount of hours that they work, but we do forecast out, assuming how many hours do we anticipate them working, how many weeks are left in the year. But we do encumber all salaries.
right.
In terms of non-salaried accounts, anything that's a purchase order that goes out gets encumbered before the purchase order gets out. There's also something called blanket encumbrances. So similar to like electricity is a good example. You draw down on that encumbrance. And so while that encumbrance isn't an obligation to pay that full amount, you can draw down off it. And that's one of the reasons why at the end of the year, you might have something encumbered, but then maybe you do a purchase order change order, and then you can free up small amounts of money because it's not an obligation for that full amount. It's a drawdown on that account.
Okay, great.
Okay, sorry, and I'm almost done. Just a few more. It's what happens when you give me lots of time with a packet. I'm looking at Fitch. I just want to make sure our run rate on that is right. Is that through January? It seems a little bit low if I look at a 10-month expenditure.
For which specific?
High. So Fitch,
For which specific line item?
if I look at the total budget, sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. It's like 410. But you think that's on track, or is that through December or through
So that's-
January?
So that's on track. So the teachers, for example, in that line item, teachers do have the right to elect 22 or 26 pays. For the
Okay.
teachers that elect 26 pays, you get what's called the balloon check in June. So
Yep.
they get their normal 2 checks plus the 4. So for many accounts where there are teachers, not just Fitch, you'll see a little bit lower than what you would expect, let's say 50%, because they are going to get that balloon check in June. For the non-salaried expenditures, we obviously only pay bills when we get an invoice. And so if there's a little bit of a delay in terms of when we get the invoice, you might not see that exact 50 or 60% expenditure. It really depends on when we get that bill and what services are needed. So really the expenses within Fitch are the salaries and then obviously the lease for the building.
Okay, nope, that's perfect. That's actually answers exactly what I was looking at. And then lastly, in RC 20 finance, in our last report, our forecast for personnel was $660,000. We're now looking at 696, and I don't see any transfers in. Can you tell me what's
Sure.
going
There
on?
was, so there is a portion of an expenditure that goes to the food service fund, but with the food service fund running a deficit, that amount needed to be covered. That was covered through a budget adjustment, and that was salary savings through turnover between the timing of when somebody was hired and when somebody left.
Okay, wait, so back me up here just so I can, so in our personnel for finance, we have some of the food service.
So it's typically coded in the food service fund, but given that we've been closed for a number of days and months or hybrid, obviously the food service fund is running a deficit and can't cover all expenditures. So if you look at the document that's included called January Accounting Adjustments and Reconciliation,
Yeah,
you'll see that amount covered through a adjustment and reconciliation.
okay, and that's in the superintendent approved?
Correct.
All right, sorry, I just missed one going into RC 20. I'll go back and look at it. I think that's all I have for now, unless anyone else has anything.
Just
Mr. C?
Yeah, sorry, just for perspective, Rich, what did we assume on the ECR reimbursement for this 21, 22?
67.5%.
And Mr. Rudel, I'm correct that what we were seeing, part of that assumption was that we were seeing lower reimbursement rates
So-
across the board in our student population, different needs that we would be able to apply for
The
reimbursement.
expectation throughout the state is that schools are going to be open next year and that there'll be a need for recovery services, not just in Darien, but any district. Given the state has again recommended flat funding ECR, the expectation is that that reimbursement rate will be low because expenditure claims submitted through districts throughout the state will be high. The pot of money's flat, then that puts downward pressure on the reimbursement rate.
Could you just remind me what we originally budgeted for this fiscal year? Was it 75?
We budgeted 70.
It was 75. Okay, thanks.
Okay, all right. We will move on to the reopening of schools projected expenditures.
So we are assuming a total projection of about 2.4 million before transfers, including grants. We do have the transfers that were approved prior to this meeting of 649,993. That brings us down to the 1,773,000 projection. Largely things have stayed the same. We did include in the PowerPoint, again, a bridge of expenditures. We did have a small reduction in part-time custodians due to less hours worked. As we mentioned in the previous meeting, only 3 of the 4 campus monitors were hired. We have some small savings in LPNs. That was largely due to the snow day remote days that happened. So when the 4 elementary schools that have the LPNs are closed, we don't pay that expenditure. We did ask to have the buses have an additional deep cleaning. So we saw a little bit of an increase, about $5,400 in bus sanitation fees. The closure in early January plus the remote snow days in February resulted in additional losses in the cafeteria fund. All together, they netted out roughly $14,000 change between the prior month and this month. And then included is the ESSER 2 allocation that the state has awarded Darien.
Questions?
Yep.
Mrs. Ritchie?
Okay, sorry. So the ESSER grant, this most recent one, when do we expect to receive that?
So the state has indicated they expect the portal to open within the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
And so the process will be, once the portal opens, we have to submit essentially our application that says what expenditures are we requesting reimbursement for. And it has to be State Department certified and approved. And then the following month, we'd be able to draw down on those expenditures. So assuming that it opens up within the next 2 weeks, we'll enter our application shortly thereafter. Once it gets approved, we'll probably draw down on those funds probably beginning of April. So you get every month you get a chance to draw down on those funds. You can only draw down on what you've spent. So as of right now, our anticipation is to draw down for teachers, some of the teachers that were at it as an example. So if we're able to draw down in April, we'll draw down what they've been paid through April.
Okay.
And then we'll draw down again in May, and then we'll draw down again.
Okay, so even though they're contractual obligations, we can't fully draw down on those salaries until, okay, understood. I have a question. Where do our grants appear in the RC detail?
So those
I
are
can find them.
so those are a separate fund.
Okay,
So we're only showing the operating account within the financial account. If there's a desire to show grant accounts, we certainly can.
so,
We get to get those out.
well, it would be good just because as I was reading through, I was trying, it was like double checking the math and I just they didn't come up on the report. So it would be good to clarify. I mean, I know they're there, it's just they're not here. So it would be great to have
So
them.
for the RC28 grants, since those are reimbursement grants, they do get netted against the expenditure. But for grants like IDEA, for example,
Right,
or the title grants, those are in a separate fund.
okay. So, and then the appropriation, when the appropriation comes in, I don't know, which is, I guess, a little bit higher than what our expenses are right
So
now.
when the appropriation comes in, what you'll see is a one-sided budget entry in RC28,
Okay,
and they'll be delineated across some of the various accounts, the technology individual, the LPN, the contract cleaning, et cetera. And then what you'll see is that 1.78 million plus the $649,000 of transfer,
right,
and then that'll essentially be your budget for RC28.
okay.
Rich, will ESSER 2 cover that unemployment loss that we have?
No.
Any reason why?
So the state has a set of criteria in terms of what we can apply for and can't apply for. Unemployment benefits are not one of the criteria that's been set out.
So we'll have to find money within the budget, even though those are COVID hires.
So at some point, so similar to last month where we want to transfer a request for unemployment to do a portion of that cost, we're going to have to do another transfer at some point to cover that balance. So the state has indicated through the federal government that there'll be a reimbursement of approximately 50% of claims, certain claims on unemployment insurance. We haven't received that reimbursement, which is one of the reasons why we didn't bring a full transfer last month. We only worked a portion of that transfer. but we do expect to have to do another transfer of unemployment insurance.
Okay. Any other questions?
So Dr. Adley.
No, Doctor, I can't see Dr. Adley.
It's not really a question, Tara. It's just to point out if there's any new news, and the only thing that potentially impact us a wee bit, not significantly, is just what we do with the vaccination for our staff members and how that is paid for and so on. So that's just something that's.
Wait, back up.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us more now. What costs would we be incurring?
It potentially for staff members, if it's beyond, for our nursing staff, if it's beyond the school day.
So the nursing staff would potentially administer the vaccine, is that the?
That's potential.
Okay, so that would be a cost to the district. And as we heard last night, that potentially is going to start hopefully next week. So.
Well, I
hopefully.
just don't want to get too far ahead of us.
Oh, I'm
So
frozen.
this is literally hour by hour, but if there's a scenario where there's additional assistance needed, which I anticipate that there will be in order to actually administer the vaccine, because at the time they have staff that work there throughout the day too, right? So if we're administering anything beyond the school day, the potential cost there.
So Dr. Adley, I think that's an important broader conversation. I mean, I have been volunteering
Yes.
at those vaccine clinics, and our Department of Health is doing a fantastic job. But I think that's a question of why the local Board of Education would incur healthcare costs for vaccination. And I don't put that on the town, but I think that's a broader question. I'm not sure that's a burden that's related. I don't know. And I don't know about them, but I think that's a much broader conversation of why local boards of education would now be picking up a public health crisis fee. And again, that doesn't mean that I think the local Darien Health Department should either, because I know they're working very, very hard. But I don't know that that's an outright cost for a board of education. And I think that this board would have to have a serious conversation on that.
Well, there's been no finalization of that, but it's just highlighted as a variable.
So our staff, the nursing staff from the schools would be used to administer those vaccinations. So
Those sessions are dedicated for staff only.
this would be after school hours. Excuse me.
So I understand that some of our staff have already gone, right?
Right.
Under the age eligibility, we're not paying for that. So your point is well taken in a sense. But anyway.
So more to come.
Yeah.
Further discussion on that. If
Great.
Thank you. It's appropriate.
Yeah, so, and I would ask more to come soon, because if teachers are looking and hopefully able to get vaccinated next week, we kind of need to know the lay of the land.
Yeah.
Any other questions on reopening?
No, I'm just saying, yes, we're working on it like literally hour by hour.
With the town too.
Yes. Oh, yes.
yeah.
No, definitely. Yes.
Thank you.
Of course.
So you've been great, by the way.
Yes. David gave a great presentation last night to the RTM.
Yeah, and like I said, I've been there week after week, and they've been doing a fantastic job. And so have the volunteers who have been there. So I almost think this is more a Connecticut State Department of Health question more than the local, but I do love that Darien is pulling together to get this done. Moving on to budget transfers, 2020.
Sorry, Tara, I forgot I had a question on the ECS. Can I go back and ask that? I know it's not on the agenda item that we're currently on, but.
Well, ECS goes to the town, so I think Rich can probably help answer, but ECS goes to the town.
Right, that he had included it in our packet, so I
Yeah,
just
go
wanted
ahead.
to quickly touch on it. So the ECS is to the town, and it's going up because of an adjustment made to the excess cost.
So originally, we anticipate that adjustment to go the other way.
Right.
And part of the reason was when we submitted our March 1st filing for last year, it was about 2 weeks prior to COVID happening and, everything shutting down. So obviously what we expected to happen between March 1st of last year and June 30th was very different than what ended up actually happening. So everybody in the state really thought that was going to be a negative adjustment to ECS. And so what happens every year, whether it's a COVID year or a non-COVID year, the district gets audited every year along with the town. They'll look at what changes actually occurred between March 1st and June 30th of your filing.
Right.
Typically, they're pretty small. It might be a student didn't attend for a few days, or maybe a student came back that you expected to be out. And so they'll do an excess cost adjustment, and that adjustment could be positive or negative. It's typically pretty small. And then the state will tie that adjustment to the ECS payment in April that goes to the town.
Yep.
So originally we thought it was going to be negative because of that change. What happened, obviously that change affected everybody throughout the state. And so everybody's claims were changed quite significantly. So the state did leave that pot of money the same rather than retaining it. And so that ended up flipping that adjustment from a negative number to a small positive number. And at this point, the state is estimating that to be about $13,000. And so the town would get that $13,000 adjustment with their April ECS payment.
Okay, just want to confirm that. Thank you.
And we have let Jen Charneski know about that.
Right, good, perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. We'll move on to budget transfers, 2020, 2021.
So there'll be two transfers recommended for approval. The first one is for $92,744. This is to move the funds from salary savings from a speech therapist who's on leave of absence to a contracted speech account, which is being used to cover that leave of absence for that teacher. Again, it's not really a shortfall in contracted speech. It's really just a reclassification of where the funds go. And then the second is pretty similar. We have a leave of absence for a psychologist, a portion of leave of absence for a psychologist. And this is just moving those funds again to consultant services. It's just how the services are being delivered in a different manner.
So,
She can't see it.
Sorry. Mrs. Ritchie.
It's just, the leave of absences for those two employees. Do we anticipate that they will be coming back to the district
So the
in the fall?
anticipation they'll be back next school year.
Okay, thank you.
So Rich, in your memo, is there a way you can just footnote these when there are transfers up? So next to the contracted speech, deficit and where, put a 1 or an A, just so we can follow it in the memo. I mean, it's awesome, but sometimes it gets a little confusing. Much trouble, let me know.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Anyone else?
Okay.
No,
Rich,
Thank you,
Rich-
always, Rich. This is a good job that you do on all of this, and for all the work you did on, and Dr. Adley on the appropriation as well. Just, thank you.
Smoothly.
I have a question on the adjustments and reconciliations. I see we have police for the Oxbridge start of construction. I have a question why that's a district expense and it's not running through the building committee.
It was specifically requested by the principal as opposed to the building committee.
So expenditures related to construction fall under the building committee's purview. And so I'm just concerned. I don't deny the principal's request, but I think that that in general, that's the authority of the building committee, not ours.
So part of it was that those days coming back when we were fully remote, the concern with that in construction due to traffic. So this principal did request that he have police just for a couple of days. Students got used to coming back when they were out for a full week. And then obviously because of the construction back up on Mansfield Avenue. It was for just those 2 days.
Yeah, Tara, I did go up there and look at that with the police. I just felt I needed coverage for a period of time.
Okay, so this is a temporary cost. If we anticipate future costs related to the construction, then we would have that run through the Oxbridge Building Committee.
We would have to bring that up to the building
We'd have
committee and
to.
see if they would approve that.
Yeah,
Okay.
it seems like a hybrid, like
Sure,
you define certain things, COVID, non-COVID, this seems like a hybrid.
Well, and so I think if that's the case, I would request that the description changes just as we track this, because I also think it's helpful for the building committee as they track their expenses. They've done such a great job staying on budget and really buttoning down those costs. So if this is a request from Oxbridge due to traffic concerns, then I think we should classify it for that. If this is due to construction, I think that's a different conversation. So what jumped out to me was not the dollar amount as much as the description. So I would request before this goes to the board that changes, because I do think that can get confusing, as you start to go down the road and we forget, oh, what was the cause? What was this? If this is a district request for police to help during traffic, that's fine. If it's due to construction, I think it belongs with the building committee. So up to you guys how you classify, but I think those really are the distinctions.
It's
And
just a wee bit, it might be just a wee bit one and the same and hard to differentiate. But it'll just be hard to just differentiate the two because some of the time that they're there for the traffic, some of it's attributable to the design that was done, and therefore we had to see how it all played out. So how I categorize it will just be interesting, I guess.
Well,
Yeah,
there's
so I
always
guess
traffic.
all I'm requesting is that if there's $3,200, we just need to know whose expense is incurring that. And if it's the Board of Education's and the district's expense, then that's ours. If it's due to construction, then we need to let the building committee know so they know if they have an ongoing cost or they know that this is going on. And I do think part of that is they've done such great financial planning that we owe that to them. But I do think construction costs rightfully belong with the building committee so that we understand what we're doing with our budget. And if this is us and this is just our decision, then so be it. I'm not disputing the dollar amount. I just need the theory to hold one way or the other. So that down the line, we know what we're doing if there is a question on something that's a much larger dollar amount. So up to you all, but that's my concern.
Agreed. I think then for tonight, if you're okay, I think I'd be comfortable putting it down as the traffic.
That's fine. If there's ongoing expenses related to traffic due to the construction project, then we should be
Then have to-
more accurate when we report that. But for this instance, I think the principal saw the need. It was a hazardous situation, and I think it's appropriate to just keep it where it is for now. In the future, we can contact the building committee on those types of expenditures.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we'll move on to public comment.
Good morning. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you are unmuted for public comment. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. There are no raised hands at this time.
You know what? Thank you, Michelle. Rich, and I'm sorry to do this. I'm going to blame it on my technology here. I know you mentioned that there was a change in that finance account. I don't see it in any of these adjustments. Can you just point out to me where it is?
It is under DLC and above classroom libraries.
It's under DLC.
So the line item DLC is the line item right above it. You'll see the word reclassification.
Okay.
Are you looking
Maybe
at
it's
on
just-
your adjustment sheet?
Yep.
Okay.
I just don't see anything going in. Oh, your accountant reclassification?
It's like midway through the list, down the list.
Okay. Yep. All right. Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. May I have a motion? May I have a motion to adjourn?
Made it.
Mrs. Ritchie, a second? Mrs. Perrin, all in favor?
All of us
All
raise
of
our
us,
hands.
We're all in favor. Motion to adjourn. Thanks, Tara. Good luck getting back.
Thank you.